This is Professor Antonio S. Marahas, and this is Advanced Digital Technique. Okay, so we have now the shift right register. Shift right register moves the stored bits to the right. Okay, so what we have here is a 4-bit shift right register. So if you notice that unlike in your shift left register, your input is found here in your D sub 0. Now this time, your shift right register, your D input is now connected here in the leftmost part of your circuit, which is on your D sub 3. Okay? And if you notice also that your Q sub 3 now here is fed back to your input D sub 2. The output of your Q sub 2 is fed back to your D sub 1, and the output of your Q sub 1 is fed back to your D sub 0. Okay? So that is 4-bit shift right register. So for example, we start with clear is equal to 0. Clear means what? It clears all the data in your memory element. So in this case, when clear is equal to 0, that means that your output Q here will be 0, 0, 0, and 0. Okay? So when clear is hung, then this is now ready to receive data coming from your D input. So assuming that your D input is equal to 1, okay? So D input is equal to 1. So what will now be your D equal to? That is your D3, D2, D1, and D sub 0. So what will be the value of your D? So in this case, if you notice that your D input is directly connected to your D sub 3, so therefore D sub 3 is equal to 1. Okay? While D sub 2 is connected to your Q sub 3, which is 0. Okay? Then, your D sub 1 is connected to your Q sub 2, which is also 0. And your D sub 0, which is connected to your D sub 1, is also 0. Okay? So that is the value of your D. So, if we will trace it, D sub 2 will be 0. Okay? D sub 1 will be 0. Q sub 1 will be 0, which is connected to your D sub 0. Okay? So that is the initial value of your D. So that on the first positive edge triggering of the clock, again, D implies Q. The value of your D sub 3 here will be stored in your Q sub 3, so that your Q sub 3 becomes 1. And then the value of your D sub 2 here, which is 0, will be stored to your Q sub 2, so Q sub 2 will be 0. Then the value of your D sub 1 here will be connected to your, or will be stored in your Q sub 1, so Q sub 1 will have the value of 0. And then the value of your D sub 0, which is 0, will be stored into your Q sub 0. Then the value of your Q sub 0 is 0. So that is your Q, output Q. Okay? So if you notice that you have D implies Q, that is your output during the first positive edge triggering of the clock. Now, assuming that your D input remains 1. So what will now be the initial D? So if you notice that this one here is already 1 based on our first output. And then Q sub 2 here will be what? The value of your Q sub 3 here, which is 1, will now be transferred or fed back here to your D sub 2. So that your D sub 2 will now be equal to 1. Your Q sub 2 with a value of 0 will still be the value of your D sub 1, which is 0, and so on. So your initial D, therefore, before any positive edge triggering of the clock occurs, or before the second positive edge triggering of the clock occurs, your D will now have what? D sub 3 is 1, D sub 2 is now 1, so you have 1, 1, 0, 0. Okay? D sub 3 is 1, D sub 2 is 1, D sub 1 is 0, and D sub 0 is also 0. So that on the second positive edge triggering of the clock, again, D implies Q. Q will have a value of 1, 1, 0, 0. Again, if you notice that the value of your D input is moving to the right, no? First is this one, and then it moves to the right, okay, and so on and so forth. So that on the third positive edge triggering of the clock, for as long as D input is equal to 1, your Q becomes 1, 1, 1, 0. On the fourth positive edge triggering of the clock, your output Q becomes 1, 1, 1, 1. So in other words, again, as I've said, the value of your D input is moving to the right. Okay? So that's how the shift right register operates. Timing diagram for a shift right register. So what is given is your clock and your D input. We wanted now to determine the value of your Q sub 3, Q sub 2, Q sub 1, and Q sub 0. So this is your, again, the input and the clock. So the first step that we should do is to make a table. Okay? So this is your truth table. So you have clock and your D input. Then the output will be Q sub 3, Q sub 3, Q sub 2, Q sub 1, and Q sub 0. Okay? So you have how many clock pulses? You have 7. So we start with 0. That means that no positive triggering. Then you have first positive, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh positive edge triggering of the clock. Okay? So we determine the condition of your D input during this particular clock pulses. So for clock is 0, meaning no positive triggering, your D input is 0. Okay? Then on the first positive edge triggering of the clock is 1, your D input remains 0. Then on the second positive triggering of the clock, your D input becomes 1. On the third positive triggering of the clock, your D input is 0. On the fourth positive triggering of the clock, your D input is 1. Fifth positive triggering of the clock, D input is 1. Sixth positive triggering of the clock, your D input is 0. Seventh positive triggering of the clock, this one here, your D input is 1. So what will be our output Q? Again, since we are using clear, initially, your Q will be 0, 0, 0, 0. However, if we will use preset, then your initial Q will be 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay? Now, on the first positive edge triggering of the clock, your D input is 0. So this value here, D input is 0, will become the value of your Q sub 0. And this one here, no. That is D sub, Q sub 3, it should start with Q sub 3. So the value of your D input here will be this value here. And this value here will move to the right. 0, this one to the right, 0, this one to the right, 0. So that will be your output Q. On the second positive edge trigger in the clock, your D input is 1, so this becomes the value of your Q sub 3. And this one here will move to the right, 0, 0, 0. And then on the third positive triggering, your clock, third positive triggering of the clock, your D input is 0. So this will be the value here in your Q sub 3. And this one here will move to the right. This one will move to the right. This one here will move to the right. Okay? Then, on the fourth, 1. So that becomes the value of your Q sub 3. This one here will move to the right. This one here will move to the right. This one here will move to the right. And then, fifth positive, this is 1. So this becomes the value here. And then here will move to the right. This one to the right. This one to the right. Okay? Then, 6, 0. So that becomes the value of your Q sub 3. Then, this one here becomes, or moves to the right. This one here moves to the right. And this one here moves to the right. And then, the last one, 7th positive trigger of the clock. Your output is 1, which is directly stored in your Q sub 3. And this one here will move to the right. This one to the right. And this one here to the right. Okay? So that will be your output. So, the next step is to draw your timing diagram. For Q sub 0, for example, the output becomes 1 only during the 5th positive edge triggering of the clock. So, we will start drawing our output Q. We will have 1, 0 here. Q sub 0, for example. So again, it will move to 1 during the 5th positive triggering of the clock, and that is this one here. So we start at 0 here because our initial is 0, 0, and then during the 5th positive triggering of the clock, it becomes 1. Okay? Then on the 6th positive triggering of the clock, which is this one here, it becomes 0. Okay? And then on the 7th positive triggering, again it becomes 1. So that will be your Q sub 0. For Q sub 1, what happened to your Q sub 1? Only on the 4th positive triggering wherein your output Q becomes 1. So from 0 here, then the 4th positive triggering, it becomes 1. And then, it becomes 0 on the 5th positive triggering. Becomes 0 here. And then it becomes 1 again on the 6th positive triggering. Okay? And then 1 up to 7. Or 6 up to 7. Okay? Then next is your Q sub 2. Q sub 2, the output Q sub 2 will be equal to 1 on the 3rd positive triggering of the clock. That will be in this case here. That. And then becomes 0 on the 4th here. So you have 0. And then mag-1 na po siya sa 5th here. So mag-1 siya diha. And then nag-0 siya sa 7. This one, 7 positive triggering, 0. Okay? And the last one, your Q sub 3. It becomes 1 on the 2nd positive triggering of the clock. So this is your 2nd here. So from 0, it becomes 1. And then, it becomes 0 on the 3rd. That is in this area. And then, 1 again on the 4th. Okay. And then, 0 on the 6th. This one. It becomes 0 there. And then, 1 on the 7th. So that will be your Q. or Q sub 3 timing diagram.